My name is Marcia Bailey. I was born in Jamaica and immigrated to Florida in July of 2018. However, I'm no stranger to the South Florida churches, as I was a part of the Miami campus ministry in the late 1990s. My story begins with a battle with a notion on what it truly means to have freedom. You see, I was raised by attentive but extremely strict parents. We were often in conflict because they set boundaries that I felt were preventing me from doing what I wanted. My non-compliance led to harsh consequences, including spankings for any wrongdoing. Many Caribbean people in this room and online can relate to what a harsh spanking Jamaican style is. And many others too, right? I remember telling lies to avoid the harsh consequences I knew would be forthcoming because of my behavior. This, of course, led to more lies and more spankings. By the time I was 12 years old, I had a very fractured relationship with my father and stepmother because of my persistent, disobedient, rebelliousness and lies. By the time I was 17, I felt exhausted by the restrictions. I was tired of the spankings and my parents' attempt to rein in their rebellious child. So one day, I came up with a plan to end it all. I suffered from terrible migraines and had just filled a prescription. After arriving home from school early, I swallowed my entire bottle of prescription drugs with a colored glass of scotch. It was my misguided solution to be free from what I saw was a miserable life. The last thing I saw before I collapsed was my stepmother coming through the door. I woke up the next day in hospital with my stepmother at my side. It was a miracle I survived. She told me that the doctor said that if she hadn't taken me to the doctor at that moment, I would have died. She was never home at that time of the day. The next day, my father visited and he asked why. I basically told him that I wanted to be free of the restrictions, just wanted to be free of the spankings. I wanted to make my own choices. I want to live life my way. Then he said to me, okay, you're free. And a few days later, I returned home to a new dynamic. For the first time in 17 years, I could do what I wanted. This newfound freedom, however, did not pan out as I expected. Because I made a poor decision in my delusional state of what freedom was, by the time I was almost 20 years old in 1993, I was a heartbroken single mother who was now raising a child alone with the very parents who I thought I would punish with my suicide. But my parents were extremely gracious. They never said, I told you so. They became my greatest source of support. They gave me an apartment, paid for a nanny, and paid for my college expenses so I could get my life back on track. My father did mention one day that he knew his methods were harsh, but his intention was to protect me from the very situation I was now in. I went on to graduate from a 3-year hospitality management program in Jamaica and was now a manager at one of the largest furniture stores in Jamaica. While I was academically back on track, I continued to make decisions that led to more emotional hurt and broken relationships. In August of 1996, I had just broken off a relationship with someone I thought cared for me. Dejected, I headed home early from work. I was 22 years old and was again contemplating why I had such poor judgment and often made poor decisions. I whispered a prayer for the first time in a long time. I said to God that I have been doing things my way, which constantly results in disappointment and pain. I asked him for help to do life his way. I took a taxi. Our taxi system in Jamaica is a little different from here. And my friend Deirdre was in the taxi. Earlier that year, she invited me to the Kingston Church of Christ, which is a sister congregation of the Broward Church in Jamaica. I visited, but thought the people seemed too friendly. Overwhelmed by the culture, I stopped attending. I hadn't seen Deirdre in a little while, but because I had just prayed about doing it God's way, I felt it was no coincidence that I saw her. Despite my hesitation about how radical I felt her church was, I told her to pick me up for church that week. That Sunday, because of my prayer, something changed. It was like scales were lifted from my eyes. I now had a different view and attitude towards the people and the message. I opened myself to God's word and his people and allowed God's way to impact my heart. I started studying the Bible soon after. A pivotal study for me in the series of studies was what it meant to be a follower of Christ. I believe it impacted me because prior to that study, I didn't want to follow anyone but myself. I was struck by the words in Luke 9, verse 24. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. I was convicted and persuaded to follow Christ because it was so contrary to my view of freedom. God's word was telling me that I could only have true life if I gave up my view of what constitutes freedom. It also coincided with my prayer to try life his way. My Bible studies continued, but I still battled with independence and pride. However, I couldn't deny how different the lives of the disciples were compared to my own, and sincerely wanted to do life God's way. Around 1 a.m. on Friday, September 13, 1996, I was baptized in the beautiful Caribbean Sea for the forgiveness of sins and rescued from an empty way of life. While I struggled and failed with the boundaries my parents set for me, the lessons learned from the outcomes of those decisions caused me to embrace the boundaries that God sets. Like my dad, God's intention is to prosper me and not to harm me, and the boundaries he set for me, though in contrast with my earthly father, were filled with compassion and love, the extent of which was his son, sending his own son to die for my sin. Almost 27 years later, God's way has never failed. His words continue to sustain and call me higher. Scriptures like Isaiah 55, verse 9, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Matthew 11, verse 20 to 30, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And last, John 8, verse 36. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Thank you for listening.